This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Welcome. It is June 20th, 2023, and this is a joint meeting of the Economic Development and Industrial Commission and the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. I'm delighted to see you all. I am Gwen. I am the chair of EDIC. I see co-chairs Jackie and Jana. Do we want to do a walk about the room to say who people are? We're losing people left and right. Here we are. We've got another Jamie.
Something went funny with the system for a second there.
All right. So why don't I start with Jackie? She's on my top row, and then Jackie, you're going to tag people from your side of the group, okay?
Sounds good. Hi, I'm Jackie Russo Pereira. I'm actually just a member of the Easthampton Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. Jana is our fearless chair, and I'm sure she's on here somewhere, but I can't see her on my thing. So I'll introduce Ben. Ben, take it away.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit late. Ben Breger with the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. I wasn't sure. Are we doing full introductions or just hellos?
I think let's just do hellos. We got a lot to get through.
Awesome.
I like to stop at 5.
Great. Sounds good to me. Thanks, everyone.
Who's next for AFHP?
I can go. This is Jana Tatro.
I nominate Kayam to go next.
Oh, okay.
Hi there. I'm Kayam Jemrog McQuaid with the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Jana Tatro. I'm the chair of the Housing Partnership. Thank you, Gwen, for having us.
Delighted. Anybody else from ANFHP?
That is it. Shira is not going to be able to join us.
Okay. So EDIC, I'm gonna point to you or say who you say you, and you say who you are. Tom Brown.
Hi, Tom Brown, member of EDIC forever.
Forever. That's a crucial element. Paul St. Pierre. Actually, I'm going to introduce Paul St. Pierre. You'll have at some point people will get to hear your voice, but I want to tell you all that Paul St. Pierre is a relatively newly minted regional director of Western Massachusetts for the Massachusetts Office of Business Development, which is a huge win for this man and for our city and for all of Western Mass. What a treat. I am delighted that he has deigned to join us today once again. Paul, let us hear your voice.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Paul St. Pierre. Like Gwen said, I'm just started a position with the Mass Office of Business Development, covering Western Mass. Really excited about that, but also really excited about the EDIC and our conversation today with the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. So really looking forward to chatting with you all about these really important topic.
Cool beans. Cassie Eckhoff.
Yes.
Hey, I'm Cassie Eckhoff, a relatively new member of EDIC. And I'll pass it to Dave.
Yeah.
Dave Kutcher.
Oh, hi. Dave Kutcher, EDIC member.
Very good. Thank you. We are missing Mo Beliveau and Chris Korchik today, but I will ask them to check out our beautiful faces on the recording. We are also joined by Jeff Bagg and Jamie Webb of the Planning Department. Welcome, the two of you. Hooray, hooray. And I think we can get down to business. Ever so briefly, EDIC, have you folks had a chance to review May's meeting minutes?
Yes.
Fantastical. Anybody want to get us into the process of approving?
I have a correction. I was not present at the last meeting.
Okay.
I think.
will fix.
You think?
Yeah.
All right, so we can fix that.
I would make a motion to accept the May minutes with that correction.
Any second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the topic? Okay, all in favor of approving May 2023 meeting minutes? Caller, aye.
Aye.
Hey.
Great. Let's call it good. Okay. Now we have a few minutes for public speak. Sunny Wendorski, you're a member of the public. Are you interested in sharing anything at all, or is there another purpose for your attendance?
Oh, hi. My name's Sunny. I use they and he pronouns, and I'm a first-year grad student at Simmons. So one of my macro assignments is to attend like a public commission meeting. So yours sounded the most interesting, and that's why I'm here.
Cool. Oh, I love hearing we sound interesting. Thank you so much for being here. What a treat to have you. David Kutcher.
So I don't know if you guys got a chance to read the article that was in, I think WWLP or Mass Live about Northampton vacant storefronts getting funding. Found it kind of fascinating because, one, I didn't think those spaces needed any restoration to begin with, but also hadn't heard anything about this plan from both the state and the local level, both giving funding in order to get those two spaces cleaned up or sales ready. Just fascinating because if we could mimic the same thing, that'd be spectacular.
Yeah, I thought that was neat. Maybe we put that on another summer meeting agenda. Okay.
I'm
Cool,
just going to interject briefly and
Yeah.
and just inform the commission that that vacant storefront program runs through the Office of Business Development. And I would love to come to the next meeting or another meeting this summer or whenever and discuss that topic more thoroughly.
Great.
We would love that. Thanks. All right. Anybody else have anything that's not on the agenda that we should talk about right now? Okay, great. All right. Let us commence our group conversation. So we've got Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership here because they've got some things on their minds. We've had some recent conversations because we're looking for our next enthusiasm hurricane, which we get really good at once in a while. So we're in search of our hurricane of enthusiasm, and we're going to talk about it. So Jana, do you have a thing you want to lead with?
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I thought we could share sort of some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of priorities. Though, we didn't actually decide on any yet, but we had a conversation at our last meeting about things that we might want to start working on for the next year. And some of these things might be of interest to the EDIC or perhaps maybe not. And then I know, you all have been talking about senior housing. So I think we wanted to have a conversation about that also. So I don't know if you want me to share our priorities first, if that is okay.
I sure would.
Okay, great. So we typically annually or, every 18 months or so have a conversation about what are things we might want to work on. We've been pretty busy regardless with a lot of the affordable housing developments. Many of you have been at those meetings also. So we always appreciate having our EDIC friends come out and support some of those projects. So we've been keeping busy with those things around the Tasty Top parcel and also the school reuse. But there's also other things to work on. So we started talking last meeting about some things around, a couple things around zoning. One of the things that was in our housing production plan, so for those of you, I think most of you know this, but the city produces what's called a housing production plan every 5 years. That looks at it's a sort of a needs assessment of affordable housing in Easthampton, and then also lays out some priorities and action items. It is certified by the state. And so we often use this document as our sort of to-do list of things we want to look at. Not always, but it's a helpful guide for us. And so one of the things that was on that list from before was eliminating single family only zoning districts. That would obviously be a really big lift, but it's in the housing production plan. So we had that made the list. There's also currently an 18-unit cap for multifamily buildings. And so Valley CDC has suggested that that can sometimes be a barrier for new construction, that there's a cap of 18 units per building. You may notice that the Tasty Top development is proposed for all 18 unit buildings. But it's been, considered that that might be something that we want to look at because it's a little bit of an arbitrary number. The other thing around zoning that we've talked about in our, and Jeff and Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, but in our multifamily zoning, there is some information about that the project must fit within the community, the character of the community. So sort of this community character requirement that is not defined and rather vague, and can be coded language for maintaining whiteness. And it's come up during the Tasty Top discussions. Lots of community members have said things like it doesn't fit into the character of our neighborhood, doesn't fit into the neighborhood character. So that's one thing that we briefly talked about last meeting is what if we examined removing that from our zoning. City Council, I think, has previously done some work around bias language in other city ordinances and documents, but not particularly around zoning. So we talked briefly about that. If not removing it, then also potentially trying to define it. So it's not just based on the particular members of the planning or zoning board who are looking at the parcel. And then the other two things that came up, and one of these things we've bounced around a lot, but what is an affordable housing trust? Jackie and I have been on the housing partnership for a long time, and we've talked about the trust multiple times and never really got a lot of traction. But we have some new members who are really interested in looking at this again. So, revisiting the idea of an affordable housing trust. We have some communities in our region, particularly Amherst, that has a really active trust that's been very successful. And then the other idea is looking at community land trusts and thinking about ways to build better relationships with our open space folks. So, open space has been come up a lot around the Tasty Top parcel. We don't like to be at odds with the open space advocates. We think affordable housing and open space can coexist. And so examining the sort of the community land trust idea and also thinking of ways to build some more relationship building around some of the open space folks, particularly the new, I'm going to say it wrong, better Easthampton Better coalition that's been recently formed. So those were the kinds of things that we've been talking about lately that we wanted to share. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I know I went through that very quickly. And if any other members want to chime in, feel free to do that.
Tom Brown, you raised your hand.
Jana, just to add a couple of things. There have been some comments, unfortunately, at these public hearings that have been a bit biased. Mm-hmm. A couple of meetings ago, one person mentioned that this development could be a city within a city, mm-hmm. and they would only come out to drive on our roads and go home again. Mm-hmm. And I had an opportunity to speak at the last meeting, and I tried to define they. And mm-hmm. I probably used about 5 sentences that started with they, where they will be our neighbors, and they will be this, and they will be that. And the city within a city, you mean like New City or the Plains or Meadowbrook or Hannonbrook? You could define any of these as a city within a city, but it's not. It's a part of the city. The worst one, though, was on Facebook a couple of days ago. A gentleman who was at a couple of the early meetings and hasn't been back since. He's a neighbor of this development, and he made the comment. You've seen the articles about, and it's not going to happen now, but the articles about the refugees being transitioned through the Harley building in Southampton. And he made a comment about the fact that maybe these people can go from the Harley building to the development on Northampton Street to live. And the most refreshing part of that was that every person who came back jumped all over him big time about, we were all immigrants at one point somewhere if you go back in our family trees. And it was refreshing to have that person shut down that way in a public forum like that. So unfortunately, that's out there, but I think it's being addressed and answered very professionally.
Mm-hmm. Paul.
Yeah, a little bit different. Well, I was interested in the concept of the Affordable Housing Trust, and I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit more about how that works.
Sure. And Jackie, you can jump in if I mess it up. So an affordable housing trust, there are state regulations around how you create the trust, but basically the trust becomes, the city creates a bylaw for the creation of the trust. And the trust, in most cases, like in the case of Amherst, holds money. So it allows a community to act quickly in cases where an affordable housing, opportunity might come up, either to buy a property or buy land. So in the case like Amherst, which has town meeting, it's very efficient because you don't have to wait for town meeting to come up for the community to act on something. In our case, because we're a municipality, sometimes we can act more quickly, but sometimes, as we all know, it actually isn't that quick. And so the trust would have the ability to potentially purchase land or purchase a building or spend money on affordable housing without having, in most cases, without having to go through the CPA committee to city council, to the city council, finance subcommittee, back to council floor full vote. The trust would have sort of the authority to make those decisions. And there's specific people that have to be on the trust, and then the community can, decide other folks that can be on the trust. And it, I think of it as like another tool in our toolbox to be able to do, affordable housing development. Jackie, did I forget anything? Probably, yeah.
So a couple things in there too. So a housing trust also has to have a steady kind of revenue stream into it. So some municipalities have some of their CPA affordable housing money going into their trust. So that was something that the communities voted on. Sometimes it's when developers build a project and they don't, like for when they're sorry, I'm getting lost in my thoughts. But sometimes when developers are building a property and they have said, oh, we're going to provide X number of affordable units, but then they don't, and they instead make a payment in lieu of, and there's certain kinds of regulations that can help with that. But that's one of the key pieces, is that it has to have some money always coming into it, if that makes sense.
Okay. David.
I was just wondering if you can give an example of an opportunity that has arisen recently in Easthampton that this trust would step in and be put to use. Like I'm having a hard time visualizing it.
I can give you a not so recent example. Many years ago, there was a parcel for sale on East Street that was about 15 acres, and it abutted the Mount Tom Conservation Area, and it was going to be sold for development. And there was a lot of concern that there would be a subdivision on the slope of Mount Tom. And so the city did not have the city got right of first refusal, I think, because maybe it was agricultural, I don't remember, but didn't have could not quickly do anything. So I think at the time it was a Valley Land Trust, which I don't think exists anymore, partnered with the city to purchase the property, to purchase the land quickly so that it didn't get sold for a subdivision. And then it was like this complicated exchange where the Massachusetts Department of Recreation and Conservation purchased the back 14 parcels, became part of Mount Tom, and the 1 acre parcel ended up going to the city and then became a Habitat for Humanity property, which is the one that's on near the corner of East Street and kind of Ferry Street. And if we'd had a trust, the trust could have purchased the property instead of having to cobble together this crazy situation on Christmas Eve where Valley Land Trust had to come in and purchase the property. So there's probably more recent examples, but that's the example that I always think of as it was very, we were not able to act quickly because of the way that the city operates.
Thanks. Kayam.
Yeah, so two things. And one is sort of like a yes or no. Would a trust in like the situation, or I guess the couple situations with Valley CDC, where they've needed like pre-development funds, or I guess money to make up for the market value of a property that could be used for affordable housing. Or like something I'm thinking about is the old massage school building. Like if Valley CDC was looking at that and said, we want to make that affordable housing, but we need someone to help cover half of the purchase price or something, is that something that an affordable housing trust would be able to step in and do?
Jamie, I think the answer is yes, but Jamie, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, so broadly speaking, yes, but you can have, when the ordinance is set up that establishes the trust, it can be written in different ways to give more or less power, autonomous power to the trust, or requiring checks and balances by the city council. And so like different monetary thresholds or different types of purchasing or sales, or limiting what they can do with the funds. But broadly speaking, something like that would be allowed.
Okay. And my other question was actually for you, Jamie, and also Jeff, if you knew. So the city council special meeting that's happening tomorrow, it looks like there's like $750,000 or something being transferred into a quote unquote community housing account. So I guess I was just curious to see if you guys had any information on that.
Yep, I can answer that one too. Dan Rist, the CPA chair and city council finance rep on the committee, wanted to make a statement to the community and to affordable housing developers that Easthampton CPA is prioritizing affordable housing. They're moving $750,000 from their undesignated pot of money to specifically into the pot of money that can only be used for affordable housing related projects. There's a number of projects on the pipeline that could tap into that funds and probably well exceed that funding. But it's really just a show of Easthampton supports affordable housing and is making this money specifically only available for housing projects. It can't go to open space, recreation, or historic preservation.
All right, so it's almost like a sub trust within the CPA, like a housing.
It's just a pot of money. And so,
Okay.
and you know, if we had an affordable housing trust, they could have transferred that funds directly to the affordable housing trust to then make those to spend that funding. But we don't have a housing trust, so that just is staying in the
Gotcha.
CPA.
Paul.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, like, would an affordable housing trust, or, you know, is it possible that they would look at a situation like what's going on at the Tasty Top and say, okay, you know, your plan is to create this many units and you're going to price them at this price point. But if we contribute and defray the cost of construction, could you offer them at this price point that would fit within the affordable housing, you know, range based on our area, you know, to create qualified affordable units? Is that, you know, something that would be, you know, within the idea of or the concept of that type of program?
I think if the Tasty Top parcel gets approved and it needs to go to the city for CPA funding for to show local support, that's when like it might go to the trust to show local support for the project. It probably wouldn't be able to support operating because that would probably be millions of dollars, I would think, to be able to defray the cost of a rental property for perpetuity would probably be outside the scope of what the trust could afford. But trusts have been used for buy down programs for home ownership. So in other communities, the trust maybe gives $50,000 per homeowner to be able to help purchase a property that makes it a little bit more affordable in a community. So that's where I've seen it happen more often. I think that's happened in Amherst. The tricky part with that is that it becomes more and more of an investment of the trust and fewer people, because you need more and more money to be able to actually make that successful. But I've seen that happen more often than I have sort of on a rental scale. But it would probably, if we had a trust, it would sort of potentially take the developers would go to the trust and not to the CPA if, for example, the CPA was funding the trust on the affordable housing piece, if that helps.
Cassie, I'd like to give you a chance to say something before I know you have to leave us.
Yeah, I have to leave in a second. I'm sorry I won't be here for the senior housing portion of this agenda, because that's where my hurricane energy is. And I would like to call it affordable and lots of letters, your group, Jana, attention to some work that Paul did that showed how the population of Easthampton is aging at a rapid pace, even me. And also that they kind of represent, I don't mean to sound awful, but a barrier to accessing affordable housing for the younger population. And they want to get out and they want to downsize, but they can't afford to. And I think we really need to address this. And with that, I'm off to the school committee in Chesterfield. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, Cassie.
Bye, Cassie. Jamie.
I just wanted to add that the housing trust can also be a housing developer in its own right, and it can with Jenna touched on this, but it can own property. It's not just a means to fund nonprofit or private developers to do the right thing. It can be the developer itself.
In that case, sorry to interrupt. In that case, would the properties already under ownership by the city go under the ownership of the housing trust? Like the properties controlled by the housing authority?
No, it's separate from the housing authority. And the housing authority is not actually a city agency. It's a quasi. It's like in between city and state government.
Okay, Jeff Bag.
Thanks. I just wanted to chime in on the trust, and I know we want to talk about the senior housing stuff too. This conversation sounds appealing, and it sounds like we should just form a trust. It's complicated because there's rules. I think Jamie alluded. There's rules and regulations that would apply strictly for the trust itself, and that has never been created. And then the city would have to form a board, a committee. I don't know if it's a board of directors or a board, but they would have to be an independent board who would become the trust. And those types of things can take us a while to get formed. And then you need money. And maybe there's this idea where CPA could be just injected into the trust. The trust becomes, in some ways, an independent decision-making body about housing. And so that we should keep talking about this. We just all need to know that it's not a magic bullet, because it'll take time. And some of the discussions I've heard are that there would be some sensitivity or concern about the power of control of city council being taken away and shifted to this trust to make certain decisions. And that was my last point, was just like, we found a couple times that if the city wants to so let's just use a real life example. So there's a lot for sale right at the entrance of Mountain View. For the city to go acquire it, it's very cumbersome, multiple step process through city council. Then we need money, so we need a separate committee. So CPA committee needs to vote. We're talking we're not agile, so we're talking 4 or 5 months just to have enough money to put an offer in the property. And so that's where we are not competitive as a municipality. We're not competitive to jump in and buy something. The trust would potentially cut those times out, but it would take us several years to have a trust that is functioning, knows how to do this stuff, and has the money available to just beeline it to something like that. So that's the benefit. But the con would be it's gonna, we're talking like several years for us to catch up, like even where Amherst is. Like, they've had a trust for several years, and I think that their trust is like now fully functioning. So just that pace, that's I think Cassie just left, but I think the pace of these things is just always much longer than we might think.
And I think that the ideas that you offered, Jana, run a wide range in terms of the timeline and the amount of human brain power that needs to go into some of these things. So I look at eliminating single family only zoning as maybe a little more difficult than paying more attention to the maintenance of community character language that exists. Maybe that's an easier, maybe 6 to 8 months instead of 6 to 8 years, kind of thing. So we could combine efforts on a number of these things with much different expectations of the timeline it takes to meaningfully achieve them. Tom.
Jeff, just switching gears for a quick moment. I don't know who the gentleman was that made a presentation at the last planning board public hearing on the Tasty Top property. I believe he's their affordable housing consultant. And I thought he made a great, understandable presentation about affordable housing, how it works, the definition. It had to do with low income and very low income, how many units are going to be assigned to each of these categories. But the most interesting statement I heard him make was that people have talked about, are these apartments really going to be affordable? And he was referencing a formula that the state uses, and what might be affordable in Cambridge isn't necessarily affordable in Easthampton, but it's a statewide formula. I don't know if you can explain that just a little bit in layman's terms.
Probably not. I mean, I think Paul's presentation from December touched on, how the 80% of the area mean income, and we are attached to Springfield. I think Paul, you pointed out that that's tough because we're aligned with a big city and that type of thing. Maybe Janet or someone else can answer that. But I do. There was another presentation that happened a while ago, like even probably 2 years ago, with Valley CDC giving a technical presentation about just the many complicated steps it takes to build affordable housing. And it's really sounds easy, like just we want more affordable housing, but to get there is very difficult. But what's really affordable? I think Paul was pointing out, like some of Paul's data touched on that. So I think that's a real concern, but I do think that so that Tasty Top hearing has been going on since December. So I'm probably at about, I don't know, you count it like 12 hours of public hearing so far on that one project, just listening to people. And the thing that does occur to me is that's the numbers. And we have all these homeowners who are coming to these meetings and saying, oh, that's not affordable, and kind of chastising it as if it's not enough, when in fact that is actually what it's going to take. So like a homeowner who says that doesn't sound affordable is not a rent payer, and here they are like saying that sounds terrible. But it is kind of shocking when you hear the numbers. It's shocking, but that's kind of the way it is. To change that, I think Paul wants to change that, like the subsidized housing inventory and that structure, but that's the structure that we are probably stuck with for at least a while.
Okay.
Jana.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to clarify, Tom. So the formula for how the state determines what's affordable is the same, but the income that we use varies by region. And so, Easthampton is in the Springfield metropolitan statistical area, which is huge and challenging because our rents in Easthampton are much higher than the rents in Chicopee and Holyoke and Springfield, but we're all lumped into the same group, and that's how HUD does it. And we can hate that, but that's just the reality that we live in. I think the point that Peter Graham was trying to make is that in Cambridge, there is a huge difference between what's affordable and what's market rate, because the market in Cambridge can support 2-bedroom apartments at $2,500 a month or 3-bedroom apartments at $4,000 a month or whatever. In Easthampton, there is a much smaller gap, right, between what the state defines as affordable and what the market can support. And so I think the point that he was trying to make is that that's sort of why we've heard the Tasty Top developers talk about the fact that they might do more affordable units than they are required to do, because it's better for them and it's more financially feasible for them to do more affordable units because that price point makes sense. Whereas there's not this huge gap between the affordable and the market rate units, where if they can't charge $3,000 for a 3-bedroom apartment, and rent 50 apartments in that way. So I think that that's what he was trying to explain.
Right. So if a 3-bedroom apartment in Easthampton market rate is, say, $1,800 and the affordable one is going to be $1,500, it doesn't sound so great.
Right. And so that's why they're saying they're just going to do more affordable, because then they get the operating money. They feel more financially secure. Like, it makes more sense to do more affordable units than try to rent some really high market rate units that they don't think that there's a market for.
Yeah. Okay.
Paul?
I really did want to basically just say what Jana just said about the formula. But yeah, being lumped in together with the greater Springfield area and the dynamics around that. I do recall, and this is just from memory from a few months ago, but I think it was something like 46% of households in Easthampton, based on their income, would be people who would be looking for affordable housing or would qualify for, subsidized housing or something to that extent. And obviously, like, within the subsidized housing inventory, we're never going to get to 46% of our units, being like that. But of course, there is that differentiator between being a subsidized unit and being an affordable unit. And bringing affordable units in that are, according to that formula, 30% of your income, if you're making, 80% of the area median income, it's not that hard to get to that number. And I think it would be interesting to see truly, like, what I'm trying to think back to the housing study that was done, the housing production plan, because it had data in there about, like, what our median, like, housing costs were, and they were actually not as high as I had expected them to be in that report. But anyway, because if we're only looking at subsidized units, it looks like we have, like, no affordable units at all in the city, or very few. But when you look at what people are actually paying for their monthly rent, it may be that we have more units than what it looks like.
Jackie?
I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it might be helpful to just explain a little bit of the subsidized inventory list versus what's kind of seen as affordable in town. So all of the municipalities in the state are aiming to reach 10% of long-term subsidized affordable housing, units. So it could be rental, could be home ownership, but there's rules in place where each municipality is supposed to be aiming for that 10%. And so that's absolutely kind of documented, deed restricted housing. So that feels very different. And that's often where we end up spending CPA money. And Jana, if I start going off on a tangent, you can just jump in and I'll pull the plug on my microphone. But there's a lot of affordable housing is super complex, as you can all tell. And Jana and I have been, working on this issue for a really long time. So I don't know. I'm not sure where I was going with this point. It made sense before I raised my hand, but I think just knowing that there is a difference between units that are counted towards the inventory. So we're at about between 6 and 7% of affordable housing that is deed restricted in that inventory. So we're always working towards that. So it's good to try and get more of that, right? But also, yes, having some other affordable units with a small letter A affordable is a very different kind of thing. And they just we need all of that, but they don't count the same way towards what policy is often trying to do with the building of more restricted affordable units.
And
Thanks.
don't we get money if we get to that 10% as a city? No?
No,
I mean,
the biggest advantage is that we could deny a Chapter 40B project if
Right.
one came through that we did not support. So if we had a something that the city really didn't like, then being over 10%, you can deny it. You don't have to, but you can. That's the biggest,
Incentive.
incentive. Whether that's an incentive or not, but that's basically the incentive.
Okay. Tom?
Just one other quick comment, I promise. Just in general about the whole housing stock, supply and demand. The project on Cottage Street, 23 units. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's 19 market rate for affordable and something like that. I might be off 1 or 2 on those numbers. Availability sometime in September, October. That unit is, I'm told, fully rented.
Wow. Okay. I want to make sure, since it's 4:42 by my clock, that we have a chance to touch briefly on the way that we've been thinking about senior housing and why. So is there anybody on EDIC who wants to share their thoughts about that? Paul?
Yeah, so we looked, or last year I put together a report that I think Kyan, I think you were there for that, right? And that was a real rough draft, but it was pretty put together, I think. And but it had a lot of information about our demographics and the shift that we've had in the 65 plus population, and how that is just, it's exponentially increasing. And it's not like a fluctuation that's just gonna, we're gonna have a wave and it's gonna go away. It's really like a permanent shift just in the lifespan of people, and the impact that it's having on our housing market, where there really are no, homes that are available to purchase, like single family homes, that are not new, and we're not even really building new ones. And that has it's like putting a stick into the machine, the whole system is frozen up. And so the supply and demand dynamics have driven our housing prices crazy. We've gone from, median prices for single family homes from 230,000 or 220,000 up to 270,000 a few years ago. And last year, I think it was $380,000 was the median price for a single family home. I mean, it's just it's crazy. And so big part of the issue is that the majority of many people's wealth who are in that age group, that 65 plus, is tied up in the value of their home. Especially because many people lost their retirements with the financial crisis of the mid 2000s. But, and my grandmother is one of those people, she can't afford to leave her home, but she also can barely afford the taxes on her home. And, it's just a real tough situation for a lot of people. So you have this circumstance where many of these homes, and in Easthampton, it is the case that the vast majority of our 3-bedroom units, whether they're rental or ownership or whatever, are detached single family homes, the vast majority of them. And they're being inhabited by, and not just the 3+ bedrooms, that's 4 and 5 bedroom homes that are inhabited by 1 or 2 people, who are seniors. And there's a lot of issues with those things around the suitability of those homes for a lot of people, as they have more and more mobility issues, as the risk of isolation increases, as the need to be connected with health services increases, and this in a lack of willingness of people, or desire of people, to want to leave these communities that they've been a part of for their whole lives. We had a ordinance in Easthampton that was very brief. It was in the mid 2000s that allowed some not multifamily, but some, I guess some of them would be, but some developments to be built that had different zoning requirements. So they got rid of some of the requirements about like how far away houses needed to be from each other and things like that. So you could build with greater density for senior housing or housing for people with disabilities, things like that. And we had a number of them that came forward, but then for whatever reason, the city council got rescinded the ordinance, and that was like 15 years ago. And since then, we haven't had one development come forward to serve that part of our population. That's a really fast growing population, and a population that's very much in need of affordable housing. And I think the idea behind building that type of housing is that it opens up a unit. Like, it's every time you create a senior unit, it's really like creating two, because you have one senior unit and then it opens the unit where the senior did leave, and that's an affordable unit for a young family.
Thanks, Paul. Jackie.
So something that would be helpful to talk about is the reason that that ordinance was rescinded was all of those over 55 housing developments that were built, particularly along East Street. There was no affordable housing in them. There was a work for the affordability piece that over 55 ordinance, and folks at the beginning approved it because they felt like, oh, there won't be a drain on services in town because there won't be kids in the school system. That's how the over 55 zoning got put in place in the first place. And the intention was there to have it be affordable, but that never happened. So those are all market rate units. None of them are affordable. So I hear your point. I'm not sure I agree with the causation that the reason we have such a tight housing market is because of seniors in their homes. I actually think this is a regional problem, and it's bigger than that, right? I live on Garfield Ave, a house on my street sold for $200,000 over asking price to someone moving into town from California paying cash. So there's other pieces of the puzzle like that as well that I think are part of the challenge that we're facing, which doesn't mean that I'm against thinking about creative ways to help seniors who want to stay in the community get to age gracefully here without having to, pay all of their money to their taxes. But I think it's worth looking at other options that are already available, and really just thinking about, like, I'm not sure that that's the only issue that's causing the housing crisis that we're seeing right now. Just my 2 cents.
I think I would also add that when we're talking about this from the EDIC's perspective, we're looking at all kinds of ways that we can just invite people to think differently about how to make housing available to that many more people at that many different levels of income across the life stages as possible. And there are many small and large creative ways to do that. And so we are interested in thinking about all kinds of things that could potentially achieve that goal. And we don't focus only on housing. It just happens to be a pretty important topic across the city. So I think I saw Chaim's hand next, and then David.
Yeah, so I guess I'll echo sort of what Jackie was getting at. The housing developments that were built not necessarily being affordable, but also some important notes from the UMass Donahue report from 2017 noted specifically that single people who qualify for affordable housing, who are looking for 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartments, are particularly challenged in finding that partly because, and this is noted in the report, that there are a lot of initiatives to create restricted tenancy affordable housing, so those 55 and older units. And I think something that is important to think about in perspective is, like, I don't necessarily think that I think that there is a wide overlap in the Venn diagram between people who would qualify for affordable housing and are also, seniors looking to downsize. And I don't necessarily think taking a broader approach to the affordable housing, making sure that we're hitting the accessibility and particularly like the handicap accessible units. I think if we just take a broader approach to just affordability in general, it will allow a lot of those seniors to get into those units. Like, I don't necessarily think restricting it on the back end will, I don't know. I don't think that it will be as broad as we want it to be.
Okay, David, you still have a comment to share? Okay.
Curious if there's statistics on whether there has been an increase over the last few years of seniors seeking abatements on their property taxes due to financial hardship and fixed incomes. Have we seen an increase? I mean, I know there was one a few years ago when basically it was publicized for the first time that I remember in the last 15 years, but I haven't heard anything in terms of metrics.
It's a great question. Anybody here feel like they can hazard an answer to that, or is that something we should follow up on at a future date? Okay, future research shall be achieved, and we will. That's a great question, David. Thank you. Paul?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say I hope I didn't give the wrong impression. I certainly wasn't implying that it's the only thing that needs it needs attention, or that a lack of new senior housing developments is the only reason that housing is so crazy. I mean, housing is very complex, but that is just an area where we're seeing a great increase in population, which would have a corresponding increase in demand, but we're not seeing an increase in supply. And that is an issue that's affecting Massachusetts. It's certainly affecting Western Mass quite a bit. Even like if you look at Berkshire County and you look at Franklin County, their median age has gone up to like 48 years old. Compared to what it was a few decades ago at like 33, or what it is in Boston at 32. So it's definitely it's a real issue that's affecting a lot of communities. But again, it's not like, oh, if we had a bunch of senior developments, then all of a sudden all the housing would be very affordable. Like it's just one part of the the mix that we need to have a healthy housing market.
Yeah. Jenna?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, Paul. And I think one way to look at this is really like, we need more housing, right? In general, we need more of everything. We need more market rate units. We need more affordable units. We need different kinds of units. We need small starter homes. We need apartments. We need it all, right? And so if we think about, and our current multifamily zoning is not, you could build senior housing, you could build non-age restricted housing, you could build whatever, and we're starting to see it being used a little bit more, right? So the Cottage Square apartments, which is 23 units. Tasty Top is using, I think part of the parcel is using the bylaw, and the other parcel is using 40R. But one way to think about it is, what could we do collectively to make that multifamily zoning better? Right. So we already talked about the 18 unit cap per building, and which is something that I think the housing partnership is interested in. But the other thing is that a special permit is still required for more than one building. So are there things that we could do zoning wise to make it easier to build more housing? So you could build senior housing, you could build housing for families, you could build, that would make it more attractive for developers to want to build in Easthampton. And that might get to, kind of all of the things that we're interested in. But that might be one angle to look at, is like, what could we do to just make it easier to build in general?
Yeah, I think that's well said. Tom?
Yeah, I would agree about more would be better. Supply and demand of anything. I mean, if I have 5 pencils and 100 people want pencils, guess what I can do to the price of those pencils? The same thing happens with housing. There's just too many people chasing too few homes. And to me, as you said, Jenna, across the whole spectrum, if you added inventory to all of them, the prices are going to at least stabilize, if not even come down. Jeff, one thought I had years ago, 3 administrations ago, was, developers have told me one of the biggest costs to building a house is the cost of the land. And is there a way that the city might have some land available that they could I don't know, giveaway to a developer with the condition that you're going to build 50 homes in here that aren't going to be more than X. They're not going to be more than $250,000 because you're getting the land for nothing, and you could still make a nice little profit. And we get 50 homes on the market they're going to sell for 250,000 that have to look like, I don't know, a $300,000. They have to look, you know, we don't want a bunch of row houses, but you know what I mean. If we could reduce that cost of that construction, Jana's point, does that help them build more houses in places where they can't build today because the city's just sitting on a piece of land doing nothing?
I'm gonna try to answer that, and then I did have a couple thoughts too, so don't let you sidetrack me. But we have a project underway. It's CPA funded. It's been underway for probably a year and a half, almost 2 years, with a consultant, Valley CDC, looking at city-owned properties to assess them for, you know, the suitability for affordable housing. The sad reality, I think, is that we're not land rich. We are land poor. We have very few parcels that are suitable for housing development. And so Valley CDC has been turning over like every stone. And, you know, there's a couple gems, right? And so the elementary schools were one of them. And we did exactly what you said. It took, in all honesty, it took us 5 years to get that process done. And we have a developer who's been selected to do what you said. We had a list, and it wasn't senior housing, but it was affordable housing. So the other property, there's a property out on Oliver Street that was the old lodging house. I mean, that is a city-owned parcel. That's the next best opportunity for us to create some housing that's city controlled. So we've done that. There probably are other properties, but every property you look at has complexities, issues. But so we have done that. But one thing, I know we're wrapping up soon, a little bit nuts and bolts, but I went back to the December meeting because I wasn't at it, and I watched Paul's presentation, and I actually just quickly watched the April meeting where you guys had some conversations, the EDIC. Maybe this is a continuation, a continuous discussion that we'd have. I think this kind of like rising tides lifts all boats. This idea of if we can develop more housing, I think it could have these mutual benefits across the board. But I did go back to the zoning. I currently have like the 1995 zoning up, which is when we had the section for multifamily housing for, you know, elderly and disabled people. That's that handicapped persons is what it says. I just want to take a dive together at the next meeting with some people, because I don't think there was anything that special or unique about that zoning. The one thing I have been able to find, just kind of comparing it, is that there was no land area requirements. So like in the other section, you have to have a certain size parcel. Every unit you add like 5,000 or 10,000 square feet. That seems to be the one thing that wasn't there. So I think my point is that the market demand is actually, my point was, I think we allow a developer could come in now under our existing zoning and propose senior housing. But I think what we are waiting for is for the market to change to drive a developer to do that. And I think some of the costs you might expect are like the services that would come with a true over 55 community. So we can do some housing development and pitch it to over 55. But if we want to provide them with some kind of community service or communal services, the developer is really going to have the financial incentives to push that. And I don't think there's anything preventing that right now. And then Jackie was saying something about maybe the reasons why it got repealed. And I was a mere person in Easthampton at that time. I don't know what I was doing, but I wasn't paying attention to that. What I was wondering is if it was the fear of development or change that could have happened to repeal that. So Paul, your chart had we received 5 proposals for age restricted housing at that, in the 2005-6 range. And I wonder if there was a reaction to that happening, because I am concerned that I am sensing that same reaction now. We have like 2 projects that are utilizing our newer zoning that's supposed to be a little bit easier. And I sense fear of development and fear of change. We barely have we have Cottage Street, but Tasty Top is still in the process. And if people are too afraid of change or density, then we may never get any new units. So I was wondering if that had an effect, like in 2005, if that was part of the reason that it got repealed. But I don't know if Jackie knows firsthand. But those are kind of streaming thoughts. So I think continuing to look at it, if there was another incentive we could put in there somehow. But I do worry about the fear of change that's happening right now. If we make something further by right, or one of the glitches, we did make multifamily housing with affordable units by right. That was the goal. But unfortunately, there was one clause in there that remained, it was unedited on accident, that there's still a special permit if you want more than one building. And so, that could be something we would change that might free up any developer to produce any new housing units in multiple buildings. But I will say that having sat through 12 hours of public hearing, I think even that change at this point is going to have a lot of discussion around it. So I'll stop, but thank you.
All right. I'd like to acknowledge that I want to honor our 5 p.m. ending, but that was 3 minutes ago. So I'm going to give Paul and Tom a chance, and then I'm going to suggest that we continue this conversation in the nearish future. And I'll give Jan and anybody else on AFHP a chance to say absolutely not or totally. Paul.
I have so many thoughts on this. It's hard to keep everything, concise, but I'll try. But I do want to mention, just for some background information about the, there was a big wave, a statewide wave of 55 plus housing that happened like 2001 was when the applications first started coming in. Now, this really hit Eastern and Central Mass huge, and Western Mass got a little bit, but there weren't a ton of these developments that happened before the 2000. I mean, there were some, but that was really this wave. And then we did get like 5 or so, whatever it was, applications around that time. One of those developments was really troubled, had a lot of issues, and it took years and years for it to even get finished. And one of the city councilors, I forget who it was, but had told me that that made them like basically made them say, oh, maybe this ordinance isn't the best thing. We need to rethink this, or, but it's never really been looked at to think what could we do differently about it that would make it work better for us, or what could we do? But I also feel like a lot of these 55 plus developments that got built, they're not necessarily the ideal for so many seniors. It's important that when we think about the housing arrangements for seniors, that it's about connecting them with services that they're going to need. And seniors have a very different, standard of living or very different housing needs than people who are young, in terms of like single floor living, stairs, in terms of having, hallways that can accommodate wheelchairs, things like that. And also, unfortunately, a lot of different mental conditions, like dementia that will happen in very high rates as the population ages, like it goes up exponentially. So there's a huge need for connecting seniors with services. And I would hope that if we were to bring senior housing back, to Easthampton developments, that it would be housing that's connected to services, at least in some way. If that's just a personal view. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that and let you go, Tom.
Tom.
Jeff, my recollection of that being the over 55 being rescinded is that it was the exact opposite situation we have today. There was a fear there were too many homes and not enough buyers. And at one point in time, there was something like 300 over 55 units available in Easthampton. And I believe the fear was that, oh my God, what if these don't all sell? We're going to end up with these sea of yellow homes that are development that's half full. And it took a while. Those homes didn't get filled up overnight, but I think it was rescinded because of a fear of overstock, if you will. But I want to go back to your statement of fear of change. I like that. However, that's a sweet way of saying not in my backyard. And when I go to these meetings and I look in the room of 75 to 100 people, all but 5 to 10 of them live in the immediate area of the development. And if this development was going on the southern end of town, 75 of those people wouldn't be in the room. So I don't know that it's a fear of change as much as a fear of, I don't want this in my backyard. And I'll give a pass to the folks, the conservation folks, and the folks across the street with where they want the road to go. I'll give a pass to those folks, but everyone else in the room lives around that property. And the most vocal presentations that have been made are people who live on streets that surround this property. So I'm going to call it what it is. It's not a fear of change, it's NIMBY.
Thanks, Tom. All right, it's 5:07. Let's be done in the next 3 minutes. I'm very interested in the whole suite of the 5 points you made early in the meeting, Jana, about the priorities that you're considering. And I think that having, I think that there are a number of ways that we could decide as partner committees to support one another's efforts on those, whether that is a completely active partnership or just a cheerleader partnership once in a while remains to be seen. I think the conversation we had around the housing trust was fascinating, and also doesn't mean that that's the thing that we're going to do, but I love learning about new ideas, and I think that's what our crew is here to do. You brought up a new point about the special permit still being required for more than one unit. That seems like a 6th possibility for a priority that you could pay attention to, depending on how much, how many different timelines you want to take on at once. How big is your Gantt chart? So I don't really have a plan. I'm just proposing that we have not come up with a shared agreement today, and because of that, we should probably meet again and get into it in greater detail, having laid a foundation. How do others feel about that?
Yeah, and I'll also just say that the housing partnership hasn't actually decided on what our priorities are going to be. These were like our ideas. So I think potentially by the end of the summer, we might have narrowed it down to a few that we think are doable and timeline it out. And then maybe that's the good time to like share back and about what we're actually planning to proceed with.
Cool. That's great. So maybe September.
I think so. It feels like summer's half over already. So I feel like we should just plan for September.
Correct. Happy Solstice Eve, everyone.
I think September sounds good. And I would just say, just a reminder that nothing is stopping a senior housing development from happening. So if we're like, the delay is not gonna, it could happen. It's viable still as is. Just so you know, just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and to everyone's points, what are other ways we can make that that slide into greater housing availability slipperier, so that it's easier to create? Paul, I want to give you a chance to talk to the group.
Yeah, it makes me really sad to have to say this, because I love being a part of this commission, but today is going to be my last meeting. With the position that I've taken on, sorry, Jeff. The position that I've taken on is really exciting, and I'm so happy to have it, and I'm really excited to take the things that I'm learning and help use them to help benefit Easthampton. I still intend to be a good part of this commission. And again, I'd like to come and talk to you about the vacant storefront program that I didn't even know that we had. That was a statewide program. That's going to be awesome for everyone to learn about. But the reality is, I could stay on this commission, but I would have to recuse myself from so many conversations that it just wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't be able to contribute here or there in ways that would really be beneficial, I'm sure, to the community, to not have that conflict. So I have to unfortunately resign from the EDIC, and it breaks my heart to do that. I've really, really learned so much from the folks here, and I love Easthampton and talking about economic issues, and it's been great. So I'm so sad to have to say this, but it is what it is. So anyway,
thanks for joining us the entire time that you have, Paul. And don't worry, everybody. Paul has already promised me that he will find his replacement, possibly more than one. We would always benefit from having anywhere closer to our full complement of members. So keep recruiting. Yes, we want people. Tom, you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, thanks, Gwen. I was going to suggest that we cannot accept Paul's resignation until he finds 2 replacements.
Okay.
But I do want to thank Paul for his writing and research skills. It's been a huge asset to this group. And maybe, Paul, from time to time, we could call on you to write something for us, because the things you put together, your writing and your research, have been a huge asset to this group. So thank you for that.
no problem. Thank you, Tom.
Totally uncredited ghostwriting. You want that, right? Okay, y'all, we're going to end this conversation so we can all do our own things. Someone help me do that formally.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any further conversation about ending this magnificent joint meeting? Seeing none, all in favor, holler aye.
Aye.
Yay! Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.